Just wanted to call this meeting of PSTE together to order. We will be joined momentarily by our veteran, George Edwards and Michael Jackson, and we have the good senator from the 6th District here, also Johnny Ray Sailing. We have 4 hearings, briefings that we should hear about: Mdot Debt Service, Mdot Port Administration, Mdot Maryland Aviation Administration, and the Department of State Police. We're going to call up the Department of State Police and to go first, and we have with us the phenomenal Madeline Miller. And Ms. Miller, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Are you able to see the screen? I've only got the one plugged in.
Yes.
Awesome. Today I will be presenting the operating budget analysis for the Department of State Police. In fiscal 2023, the budget increases by $18.2 million, or 3.8%, to $501.3 million. During fiscal 2021, the department received $120.4 million in federal CARES Act funds, reflected as the reimbursable funds in this chart, and those funds were received from the Maryland Department of Health. They were used instead of general funds for public safety salaries and protective equipment. My presentation begins with the department's performance analysis. Exhibit 1 on page 4 shows the state's crime rate as reported by the Department of State Police in the annually published Crime in Maryland report. The most recent Crime in Maryland report, also referred to as the Uniform Crime Report data, or UCR data, is for calendar 2020 and therefore includes the start of the pandemic. The overall crime rate is measured as the number of Part 1 and Part 2 offenses per 100,000 people. Between calendar year 2011 and through 2020, both Maryland's crime rate and the country's crime rate fell. Maryland's rate was 2,038 in 2020, while the national rate was 2,346. Although the overall crime rate has fallen over the last decade, the murder rate per 100,000 people has generally increased. There were 9.5 murders per 100,000 people in 2020, a 5.6% increase from 2019. At the national level, the murder rate increased 27.5% in the same period, from 5.1 murders per 100,000 to 6.5. The second topic from the department's MFR data that I'd like to discuss is traffic fatalities. Exhibit 3 on page 5 shows the number of traffic fatalities per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. Between calendar 2019 and 2020, the number of annual VMT fell 15.9%. Though travel decreased in 2020, fatalities did not. The number rose 7.1% from 535 to 573. Accordingly, the traffic fatality rate rose 27.4%. Though there are many possible explanations for why there could be fewer vehicle miles traveled and more traffic fatalities at the same time, one way through which the Department of State Police might have an impact is through DUI arrests. The rate of impairment-related fatal collisions increased in 2020, as shown in Exhibit 4. State Police reports on the total number of DUI arrests across all Maryland police agencies in the UCR data. This figure was relatively stable between calendar 2016 and 2019, but dropped by 5,985 arrests from calendar 2019 to 2020. Most of the 23% change was driven by a decrease from the other law enforcement agencies in the state, as shown in green. But the number of state police DUI arrests also fell 16.4% in this period. DLS asked that state police comment on the decline in DUI arrests and address how its approach to enforcement has adapted to current traffic patterns. My discussion of the fiscal 22 budget is on page 7. I have 2 notes that I'd like to make about the working appropriation. State Police receives $5.9 million in a general fund deficiency for costs related to body-worn cameras and for funding contractual services relating to the NIBRS program. Secondly, the supplemental budget introduced earlier this week includes $3.4 million in general funds to support helicopter maintenance in fiscal 2022. General funds will replace the Maryland Emergency Medical System Operation Fund special funds that were previously budgeted for this purpose. General funds will continue to replace special funds in fiscal 2023. The department's $501.3 million budget is broken out by program in Exhibit 5. The Field Operations Bureau receives almost half of the allowance at $243.2 million, or 48.5%. The Support Services Bureau, which includes Maryland State Police Aviation Operations, makes up the next largest portion at 24.7%. The Criminal Investigations Bureau receives $89.3 million, and the remaining programs, the Office of the Superintendent, the Office of the State Fire Marshal, and the Vehicle Theft Prevention Council make up the remaining 9%. The fiscal 23 allowance increases by $18.2 million above the working appropriation. Personnel expenses, also shown on the next page, grow by about $15.5 million. Please note that these figures do not reflect funding for statewide personnel actions, which are currently budgeted in the Department of Budget and Management. The other changes in the budget are shown on page 10. $2 million will be used for offsite data storage for the Criminal Intelligence Center at the Maryland Coordination and Analysis Center. I'll also just quickly mention that renovations to MCAC's property are in the current capital program, so that the Baltimore Regional Intelligence Center can be co-located there. The department also receives $1 million for a Laboratory Information Maintenance System, or LIMS, for crime laboratory data management. And it receives $333,000 for a general fund grant for the Maryland Sheriff's Association. The working appropriation and the allowance include costs for body-worn cameras as necessitated by Chapter 60 of 2021. This law requires the use of a body-worn camera by each law enforcement officer employed by the law enforcement agency who regularly interacts with members of the public as part of the officer's official duties by July 1st, 2023. State Police will be purchasing 965 body-worn cameras. DLS asked that the department update the budget committees on its progress towards identifying a vendor for body-worn cameras, software licenses, and storage for footage. The agency's allowance grows more than is reflected in the where it goes chart based on the actions currently budgeted in the Department of Budget and Management, which I mentioned previously. They receive fundings that these funds are also identified as being part of the administration's Refund the Police initiative. The initiative seeks to increase funding for law enforcement and for crime control and victim protection services by $500 million over 3 years. The initiative's impacts specific to state police are shown in Exhibit 7. $191.4 million will be for salary enhancements between fiscals 23, 24, and 25. That figure includes salary enhancements such as a 7% cost of living adjustment and increments for members of the State Law Enforcement Officers Labor Alliance that have already been bargained. Moving now to personnel data. Data in this chart is reflective of 3 positions funded through a deficiencies to support the implementation of body-worn camera policies. In fiscal 23, State Police also receives 1 new chief toxicologist position and 15 contractual positions within the licensing division. Then moving down a little bit here to Exhibit 8. The department is operating with 153.6 vacancies above its budgeted turnover, and 116 of the 327 vacancies have been vacant for over 12 months. A high vacancy rate is not unusual for the department. Between fiscal 2016 and 2021, State Police operated with an average of 10.3% of its sworn and civilian positions vacant. Changes over time are shown in Exhibit 8. The rate for both position types fell in fiscal 2018 through 2020. Vacancies throughout the department grew in fiscal 2021 to 7.7% of sworn positions and 16.7% of civilian positions. The issues section begins on page 14 with the Workforce Diversity Action Plan and that the department submitted in response to the 2021 Joint Chairman's Report. The report contains information about existing departmental policies, identifies some pre-existing short and long-term goals related to diversity, and provides, quote, information pertaining to the creation of, unquote, specific and measurable goals based on the suggestions of the Diversity Study Group. It also includes requested data on the department's racial and gender diversity. Exhibit 9 details some of the reported data about the department's demographics from 2018 through 2020. The current state police workforce does not align with the state's overall demographics, particularly among sworn employees. Sworn employees saw an increase in the number of female employees, but a decrease in the percent of employees who are Black or African American and Hispanic or Latino. More racial and gender diversity exists within the civilian workforce. Data specific to the department's managerial and leadership positions in the same period is presented in Exhibit 10. This data is further removed from the current state population. Racial diversity among the department's leadership grew in calendar 2020 compared with calendar 2018, though the proportion of female employees in leadership roles decreased for both sworn and civilian staff. Within the submitted action plan, the study group made 4 recommendations: to adopt policies that would measure progress towards inclusion, to convene a focus group of recently hired and probationary employees, to adopt qualitative goals, and to invest further in resources into educating, informing, and training community members and leaders. The further down beginning on page 16 and on page 17, there's a few bold items that are recommended. DLS asked that state police provide additional information on the implementation of its action plan and establishment of measurable goals in its testimony today. DLS recommends committee narrative requiring the department to report on the progress it makes towards achieving its goals, and the Department of Legislative Services also asked the department to comment further on the resources used or that will be used to implement the study group's recommendations. The next issue, and the second and final one, relates to the UCR and the state's transition to a new reporting system, NIBRS. The 2020 UCR was submitted on schedule, and DLS recommends adding annual budget language restricting funds pending the receipt of the 2021 UCR as well. Within Maryland, there are 155 data contributors to the Maryland's UCR. 27 of those contributors represent multiple locations for state agencies, however. So therefore, in its JCR response on the 1-year update of the NIBRS implementation, State Police identifies the compliance status of a total of 128 agencies. 21 of Maryland's 128 contributors, of those 128 contributors, are NIBRS certified and in compliance. The remaining 107 agencies are non-compliant, which may deem them ineligible for federal grants. I will note that Maryland State Police overall, however, is compliant with NIBRS and is not therefore ineligible. The department reports that if these agencies do not implement a NIBRS compliant system, they will need to complete manual input into the NIBRS dashboard for Maryland UCR reporting purposes. DLS asked that state police update the committees on any ongoing actions that is taking to aid in the NIBRS transition among local law enforcement agencies. Recommended committee narrative and budget bill language begin on page 19. That concludes my budget presentation, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. At this time, we'll call up Colonel Jones and his team to give us the report out for state police. Colonel Jones, just first, always want to thank you and your the state police that obviously policed our state in reference to the work that they do. But I did want to say, like, we do have your written comments in reference to the questions that was asked, and it also looks like you concur with the budget. So
I do. All right. Good afternoon, Chairman McCray and members of the subcommittee. I'm Colonel Jerry Jones, Superintendent of the Maryland State Police. With me today is Lieutenant Colonel Delane Brady of our Support Services Bureau, Mr. Paul Abel, our Chief Financial Officer, have Lieutenant Colonel Roland Butler, our Chief of Field Operations, and Lieutenant Colonel Bill Doffelmeyer, our Chief of Criminal Investigations. So if any questions come up related to our whole scope of operation, I got the team with me today. I would like to thank our budget analyst, Ms. Madeline Miller, for her work on the budget. She has been very professional during this process and has worked with our team and budget office very well. Mr. Chairman, you have our written testimony, but I would like to highlight a couple of the responses to the report. To begin with, as you just said, we do concur with the recommendations made by Ms. Miller. Regarding body-worn cameras, I'd like to take the opportunity to thank the governor and the budget committees for the support of this important program. As you all know, we were required by July 1 of 2023 to have our body-worn camera system in play. We are expecting to have our first round of cameras deployed mid-April or May of this year. We certainly want to get out and get that done Additionally, we've been tasked with helping Natural Resources Police as well as Capitol Police get their programs up and running to make sure they're in compliance and have all the infrastructure support that we can offer them. We'd also like to comment on the work the agency is doing regarding the Workforce and Diversity Action Plan. We're very excited. We're doing things that we have never done before. We have Dr. Asha Lane from Morgan State University and Mr. William Roberts, former Verizon Regional President of Maryland and DC and Chairman of MedStar Board of Directors. They're on board from the outside looking in, giving us a new, fresh perspective on what we have going on. And their participation has been critical. We're making progress based on their recommendations as well as the other team members to encompass the principles of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're adopting a policy to develop and measure progress towards an inclusive workforce rather than focusing solely on a diverse workforce. In addition, I would like to address the governor's supplemental budget and its impact on the department. The governor is moving $3.4 million from special funds and replacing it with general funds allocation that's in our aviation section. It's related to maintenance as well as salary enhancements for FY22 and 23. Just want to let you all know that does not impact the Maryland State Police's operations or responses. So with that being said, I appreciate the time to be here as always, and ready to answer any questions that any of the committee may have.
Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Colonel. Great to see you and your team here. A couple of quick questions.
Sure.
One, could you speak to the vacancies amongst your civilians? So understanding public safety, there's an expectation that oftentimes we have vacancies amongst the sworn members. It's always disturbing for those of us who are in the field or, when we lose our civilian component, because we understand that those staff members are vital to our mission. Could you speak to that? And if the addition of the doctor from Morgan State and the gentleman from Verizon, if they are a part of the hiring and recruiting for civilian positions as well?
Okay, I'll start at the back and move forward if that's okay. They are part of developing an entire plan and policy package that encompasses everything that we do in the hiring practices and everything we're doing with the department. So we're looking at it broadly, and what they come up with as a team and through the upcoming process that we have of focus groups internally and externally. We're going to develop metrics. We're going to develop policy that strengthens and focuses on that more inclusive workforce. So that's the piece there. So what they bring to the table is going to be part of the global package and increasing our recruiting and retention. As far as the civilian vacancies, we're very concerned with that as well. We've been able to make strides on a number of fronts. One of the big things we've done is we've hired 5 additional HR personnel to help us process these things. Obviously, going back a couple years, we were in a hard stop on hiring. We had some things that systematically caught up with us in that process. We have 92% of our civilian positions in recruitment as we speak. We've been working very hard with the administration, some of our long-standing issues such as police communications operators or dispatchers. We've been working very hard to get their pay where it should be, because what we were finding is during my tenure here, it's been about a 20 to 25% vacancy rate for dispatchers throughout the state. So we've been working very hard with the administration, as you will see, to try to get their pay up where it should be. So we don't just simply field train them. They come out and do the job for 6 months, and another agency picks them up and pays them a lot more money. So we're working on those pay enhancements there. Crime lab techs is another position we've been able to get enhanced pay for. Maintenance mechanics on our aircraft is another one, and we were able to be successful through ACR processes and so forth. So with those new hiring processes and the focus to get that process done, we're moving a lot, but right now it's a tough time to get hiring done. But we're moving forward in it because we have a lot of critical vacancies, and they're all very important to our overall mission, as you stated on the front end.
Absolutely, and Mr. Chairman, if I might, Colonel, if you could keep this committee informed
Absolutely.
As you move forward, and there is a piece of legislation, as you all are aware, regarding your 911 specialists or your 911 folks coming through the system, and if there's any help we can provide and your recruitment and retention efforts, make sure you include us.
Well,
We'd love to help.
those salary enhancements are absolutely critical. They've been long, long overdue. As you know, personally, that's the most critical part of our operation in the sense of getting people to where they need to do to make the most good. So, that support and getting that done and getting those enhancements that's the biggest thing we can get right now.
All right, thanks, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, comment. Thank you for your effort when you stepped in to get the Cumberland Barracks completed.
Yes, sir. That's our prize out there.
I won't be back next year, so I won't have to be yelling every year, where are we on getting that done, which I did for years because we kept kicking it down the road. So
Yeah.
it's a very nice facility. and
I hope you're a
glad to see it
visitor
completed.
regularly out there, sir, because you were very instrumental in getting that done for us, so we appreciate that.
Well, visitor in what regard? Not that they're
Not in
taking me in
handcuffs, but
there.
just coming by and say, hey.
So I want to thank you for that. Where are we with the vehicles? Are we keeping the vehicles up to date, which has been a big issue of this subcommittee over the years?
Absolutely. We've made a lot of progress. I can harken back to the day in 2015 when I was the Chief of Field Operations Bureau. Over 1,000 people in my car had 300,000 miles on it. Right now, we look at both our police patrol vehicles as well as our non-police patrol vehicles, and we're hanging right around that 105,000 mark. We're trying to get into the industry standard zone, so to speak, between 100 and 150. So as we move into FY23, we're going to move that average to about 114. So we're doing very good on fleet. It's nice to see the improvements that have come just in a short period of time, and it's been critical to a number of fronts in our effectiveness. So we're doing good.
So we don't have any axles falling off any of them out in western
No,
Maryland?
sir. No,
Okay.
salt's not gotten them yet. So I think we're good so far.
Good. Final question. I know it's hard to attract people, et cetera, but we've had a difficult time in the mountain district for medevac. Where are we with keeping that 100%
You were there.
operational?
You were there. Trooper 5 has been 100% 24-hour service for, wow, well over a year now. So we're doing a lot of great things there, and I'm very pleased to say that the entire, both Trooper 3 and 5 out in western Maryland are 24/7 and fully staffed.
Because as you know, we had trouble there a couple of times. We
do.
have enough to run it 24/7, and they had to bring some in, or they couldn't go when they there. So I want to thank you for your extra effort to try to get that fully.
Yes, sir. It's been our pleasure, and that's a very critical resource out in western Maryland. We know it, and we work very hard to try to keep it up and going, and it's a priority for us, but appreciate your support with that.
Thank you very much.
Yes,
Keep
sir.
up the good work. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Edwards. And, I have no questions, just a couple. Senator Salem.
Thank you. First of all, I want to thank you and the state police for working with the Towers Association and the Towers Companies. We know we had some problems, and a lot of the companies that got with me and worked with me, and we went down to the State Police Department in Essex, and we were able to sit down and reason, and we worked everything out. So I'm just very happy how well things have gotten back to normal, and we're working well in that area. So I want to thank you so much. They've given us plenty of time. They've given us all the information we need. So I believe the towers and the businesses and the state police are on the same page, because there was a little turmoil there, but it's not anymore. So I want to thank you so much for working with them.
Well, as always, if you have questions, look, we have no monopoly on perfection over here. So
Yep.
if there's something that seems out of the box, just give us a call, and we'll
Yep.
we'll take a look at it, and we'll shoot straight, and we'll try to get to the end where everybody benefits.
Well, it was only one time we got together, and it was fixed. So I
Okay.
appreciate that. Thank you.
Good,
Thank you,
very
Mr.
good, sir. Thank you.
Yep, and I guess I'll do the same thing that my colleagues are doing. Just wanted to say thank you for your partnership with Vehicle Theft Prevention Council, the MOU, and the work that you all are doing with BPD. I think that you equally take serious the diversity part that we have, and I think that the numbers that's reflective in here from 2018, 19, and 20 is not reflective of the work that's taking place at this moment. And just know that the committee does have a continued interest in making, following this issue. One of the things that you all were able to do for me last year was the folks that were non-compliant with NIBRs, just moving in that direction. I know that we were able to reach out to some of them that we were familiar with. If you could send that list again, that would be very helpful.
I just sent a letter to that entire list, January 13th of this year to get that information out to require that compliance and get us underway. So, but I will send you that list.
Yep, and I read that in the document.
Okay, all right.
In
great.
your testimony. So just want to say once again, thank you all for the work that you do, and thank you for your leadership, Colonel Jones.
It's an honor to be here.
Yes, sir.
All right, thank you all.
That ends the hearing for State Police, and also wanted to lift up Madeline Miller. Just thank you for your detailed report. And we'll move on to Mdot debt service, and we'll hear from our budget analyst, Mr. Stephen McCullough.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Steve McCullough, Department of Legislative Services, here to present the Mdot debt service requirement. This analysis is very short. There are no personnel issues. It's simply a discussion of the department debt. So I'm sure you're aware, the department issues 15-year consolidated transportation bonds, or CTBs, which are considered tax-supported debt, and they are included in the state's overall debt limits. The department also has non-traditional debt, which is basically everything that's not a CTB or a GARVI bond, which is Grant Anticipation Vehicle. The fiscal 2023 allowance for debt service increases by $29.2 million, or 6.5% over the current year. That's just a factor of the debt that they've already issued. They have issued all of the debt for 2022 that they plan to issue, and fiscal 2023, as you'll see in a moment in an exhibit, they have no planned debt issuance for CTBs. Now, as you're probably aware, the state laws, bond covenants, and agency debt practices limit the amount of CTB debt with a debt outstanding limit in statute and 2 debt service coverage ratios. Those 2 debt service coverage ratios are the net income coverage test and the pledged taxes and fees. And both, basically, they work similarly. The net income coverage test looks at the ratio of the prior year's income, excluding federal capital contributions and bond proceeds and third-party reimbursements, subtracting out the prior year's operating expenses, debt service payments, and deductions to non-transportation agencies, and compares that to the maximum future debt service. So it's a ratio. And under bond covenants, they've pledged to the bondholders that they will not let that ratio dip below 2 times, meaning 2 times net income to future maximum debt service. The department does have a administrative practice where they maintain a 2.5 coverage to give them a little cushion there, because under the covenants, if the ratios were ever to drop below 2.0, the department has pledged that it will cease issuing any further debt until those ratios rise above that level. The pledged taxes coverage test is the same type of calculation, except it looks at the pledged taxes. Of the 2, the net income is the more limiting, and so that's usually in the exhibits you'll see that coverage test noted. Exhibit 1 shows, let's see if I can get that, shows the debt issuances, the history, and the projections. Those are the green bars. Shows the resulting debt service, which are the blue bars, and then the total outstanding debt, which is the red line. And as you can see, back in the history, after 2013, which is when the last time there was a major revenue increase, that was the gas tax increase with the imposition of the indexing and the sales and use tax equivalent tax. The department ramped up the amount of debt that it was issuing in order to support the capital program. There were a lot of projects that had been waiting to go forward. So you see the big debt issuance peaked in 2017, has since declined, and you'll notice in 2023, there is a missing bar. And as I mentioned, in fiscal 2023, the department is not planning to issue any debt. Turning now to non-traditional debt, there are currently 11 non-traditional debt issuances outstanding and 2 pending issuances. And those are listed in Exhibit 2, and those haven't changed much year to year, although occasionally they'll do a new one. The 2 pending ones are related to the Purple Line. These are the TIFIA loan that the Purple Line partners are expected to take out once the commercial settlement occurs, which is again expected mid-month next month. And then the other issuance is for additional private activity bonds for the Purple Line. Now, every year, the recommendations, the first recommendation is to set the limit for the consolidated transportation bonds, because statute does require the General Assembly each year to adopt a limit within the total statutory limit, which is $4.5 billion currently. And so you'll see here, recommendation number 1 is for a limit of $3.3 billion, which is the expected, based on their current issuance schedule, expected debt outstanding as of the end of fiscal 2023. The second recommendation regards reporting for the non-traditional debt. There is a request that twice a year, with the submission of the draft CTP in September and the final CTP in January, that they also provide the non-traditional debt report, which is contains that information that I used on that previous exhibit to show, where the debt service and debt outstanding on each of those non-traditional issuances are. And then the final recommendation is to put a cap on the non-traditional debt. Now, several years ago, we were before TIFIA, there was just one recommendation for a number, but with TIFIA and the Purple Line, we've split it into 2 as a recommendation, because there's no reason to limit how the TIFIA loan goes out if they need to issue a lot of that in a single year. So basically, this language says, exclusive of TIFIA, non-traditional debt cannot exceed $1.4 billion, and then TIFIA itself is just limited at the total amount that expected of $1.7 billion. So that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. McCulloch. At this time, we'll pull up our secretary reports and,
You got a question over
oh, sorry, it's this computer. Senator Edwards.
The Garvey bonds,
Yes, sir.
I know the big one we did was for the inter-county connector, I think. Do the Garvey bonds have to be specific to a project, or can they implement Garvey bonds and spread it?
No, so
Across the spectrum.
in current law, they were authorized for one-time $750 million, as you say, for the ICC, and that was issued over 2 years and has now been fully repaid. And so, absent any more authorizing legislation, the department is unable to issue Garvey bonds. Now, there was legislation last year that was introduced. The department had some departmental legislation this session that was withdrawn regarding the Garvey bonds, but it would require passage of a bill to authorize whatever, and it would depend on what that legislation said as to whether it was going to be project-specific or whether it was going to be kind of a general pot that could be drawn upon.
And the amount, isn't it tied somehow to the federal government? You can only do so
Well,
much
Yeah, so
based on something?
the source of repayment on Garvey bonds is future federal aid. And so, there are a couple things. Currently, as the aid comes in, it's being spent on capital programs as pay-go, with non-debt. So the use of Garvey bonds would give you a big upfront payment, but then it would reduce the amount of your out-year pay-go available for capital programs. So there is, that calculation. I'm not sure if there is a specific requirement to the level, but again, the bondholders might, if it got too big, because the although the federal government authorizes it and allows the future federal debt service grants to be used for debt service, they don't guarantee that they're going to continue to provide that, future federal grants. So there is, some risk, although they've been around enough that I think everybody's pretty comfortable with the concept.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir. Senator, there was one correction too. Mdot withdrew it, but obviously, once the bill was introduced, it's at the behest of the chairman, so it's still sitting still if you have some ideas around Garvey and you need a vehicle. Right there in Western Maryland. Yes, sir. And now I see no questions. We're going to bring up our secretary for Mdot, Secretary Ports, and it looks like you have your CFO, Jacqueline Hartman, with you.
Yes, very good. Well, thank you, Chairman McCray and members of the committee. For the record, again, my name is Jim Ports, Secretary of Maryland Department of Transportation. I have with me Jacqueline Hartman, our Chief Financial Officer, to help answer any questions. I'm sure Senator Edwards' question involves an 81 in it, but I'd like to thank Steve McCullough, of course, for all his good hard work on our budget. And as you know, Mdot has a total of 20 budget hearings each year, so we're before you quite often. With that in mind, I'll keep my comments very brief. We're not asked any specific responses from DLS and the analysts, so as far as we're concerned, the analyst includes 3 recommended actions. All are pieces of annual budget bill language, and we concur with all, and we'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
I was curious how swift you could be.
There you go.
It seems as though there are no questions in reference to Mdot's debt service at this moment, so that ends the briefing on Mdot's debt service. Just want to say before you run off, thank you, as he stated, Secretary Port stated too, Steve, for your service, and have a blessed weekend. At this time, we're going to hear from Mdot's Maryland Port Administration, and we will hear from Ms. Kelly Norton. Ms. Norton, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Okay, in fiscal 2023, the operating budget decreases slightly by 0.4% to $50 million for the Maryland Port Administration. The pay-go capital budget increases 58.1% to $241.6 million. The port operates in a highly competitive market and handles various cargo. In calendar 2021, the port handled 43.3 million short tons in foreign cargo worth $55.2 billion. This was an increase from 2020. The port competes with other East Coast ports, particularly in New York, Norfolk, and Philadelphia. The port's market share was estimated to be 17% in calendar 2021, down from 18% in the previous year. The port also handles general cargo defined as automobiles, break bulk, containerized products, forest products, and roll-on, roll-off. Here we see total general cargo tonnage increase to 11 million tons in fiscal 21 and is expected to increase in fiscal 2022 and 2023. This chart shows the general cargo volume by type. In fiscal 21, the 4 categories increased compared to the previous year. In fiscal 2022, this trend is expected to continue for every category except auto tonnage. The majority of agency spending goes towards contracts with 40%, followed by personnel and support with 39%. As stated earlier, the budget decreased slightly by approximately $216,000. There were slight increases in health insurance and contractual employment, but there was also decreased spending in utilities, motor vehicle maintenance, and contractual services. Unlike other agencies, MPA receives revenues that are deposited to the Transportation Trust Fund, which helps offset its expenditures. This exhibit shows that fiscal '22 operating revenues is expected to be $48.4 million and grow to $53.6 million in fiscal '23. Net operating income is expected to grow $5.4 million. However, a net loss continues to grow due to the increase in capital expenditures. In personnel, there is a realignment of one position between the operating and capital programs. There are also 4 new contractual positions due to resumed cruise activity. Here we have MPA's PAYGO allowance from the 2022 through 27 Consolidated Transportation Program, or CTP. It totals $1.2 billion, increase of $114.7 million from the previous CTP. Peak spending is in fiscal '23, followed by a steady decline in capital spending. This exhibit is the list of projects in the CTP. $330.7 million has been programmed for fiscal '23. The total cost for the projects is $1.7 billion, and the 6-year cost is $1.2 billion. This chart shows the cash flow changes from 22 legislative to 22 working and the 23 allowance. The decrease between the legislative and working is due to the delayed start of the Howard Street Tunnel project, which brings us to the first issue. The Howard Street Tunnel project will allow double-stack containers and tri-level auto-track cars to travel to and from the port. It broke ground in November 2021. The delayed start has led to a change in the funding schedule. Fiscal '22 is now $52.1 million, but was expected to be $115 million in last year's session. Exhibit 12 shows the various funding sources in the years the funds are expected to be expended. $160 million is expected to be spent in fiscal '23. Here we have the change in state funding sources between the 2021 session and this session. $10 million in MDTA funding has been removed. That $10 million is now part of the Transportation Trust funding, which has grown from $68 million to $78 million. The $124.5 million that previously came solely from GO bonds is now split between GO bonds and PAYGO general funds. $103 million in GO bonds and $21.5 million in PAYGO. The use of GO bonds in PAYGO is unusual for a transportation project, which are typically funded through TTF revenues. The next issue is the continued impact of COVID-19. The port has been able to avoid the delays and congestion that have affected other ports across the nation. However, the monthly container counts continue to be below pre-pandemic levels. The pandemic has also impacted the port's cruise operations. Cruise operations was suspended from March 14th, 2020 to September 12th of 2021 at the port. MPA is projecting 2020 to perform below pre-pandemic levels and expected to rebound in fiscal '23. The agency should comment on the continued impact of COVID-19 on its operations and if it expects revenues to return to pre-pandemic levels. DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance for the operating budget and PAYGO budget. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Norton. And seeing no questions from the committee at this time, I'll bring up Secretary Ports and look like Director Doyle.
All right, again, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, it's a pleasure to be here. For the record, my name is Jim Ports, Secretary of Maryland Department of Transportation. And with me today, I have Bill Doyle, Executive Director for the Maryland Port Administration. I'd like to thank our DLS and budget analyst, Kelly Norton, for her thorough and fair review of our program. The 6 state-owned marine terminals managed by the Port Administration saw continued improvement over the fiscal year 2021 from the COVID-19 pandemic. Overall tonnage for the state-owned marine terminals was up compared to last year. Maryland's Port of Baltimore remains a leader in economic recovery and an indicator of increased consumer demand. Maryland's Port has continued to play an integral role In maintaining our nation's supply chain, our port has remained efficient, positioning itself to avoid backups and delays that other ports have seen. The port has seen significant achievements in the last few months. For example, the Howard Street Tunnel project continues to move forward. In November, the final infra agreement was signed by the state, CSX, and the Federal Railroad Administration, and CSX broke ground on the project. For the 13th consecutive year, MPA's terminals received a top rating of excellent on a security assessment from the U.S. Coast Guard, further proof that the Port of Baltimore is not only one of the most productive ports in the U.S., but also among the most secure. Now with that, I'll hand it over to Executive Director Bill Doyle to give you a few more highlights from the port and address any issues and recommendations in the DLS analysis.
Thank you, Chairman McCray, committee members. My name is Bill Doyle, for the record, Executive Director, Maryland Port Administration. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. You do have in your package a PowerPoint presentation. Feel free to flip through that. I'm not going to go through it. We're doing excellent at the port. We're the least congested port in the United States of America. We had the second largest tonnage year ever in the Port of Baltimore, only second to 2019 this past year. We expect our volumes to increase in the coming year, especially based in March of this year, when we have the new cranes operational and the new second 50-foot berth. With that, I'll take any questions. Those are my comments.
Yep, Senator Saylor.
First of all, I want to thank you for working not just with the port, but with Trade-Point Atlantic.
Yes, sir.
We see that we are #1 in Ro-Ro in the nation, which is something that we should be very proud of. So we're very happy how both of you are now working together, because I know at one time that wasn't happening. But we see great things happening, and we see this continue on. So I want to thank you so much. And I want to thank you for your transparency. I want to thank you for working with our truck drivers, because I know that was a problem, and it's going very well, because I meet with the truck drivers, and you're not going to make everybody happy, but I know the majority are. So that's a good thing.
Yes, sir.
We've come a long way, but I want to thank you so much just for working with all parts of the port. And I think we've come a long way. I think we are doing some great things, but I just want to thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Senator Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Couple quick questions, or one comment. I think the Howard Street project, that's going to be a tremendous asset to the state of Maryland, period. Well, the country as a whole, but particularly the state of Maryland. I'm glad to see we got to the point we're doing it, and that the railroad's cooperating, which they're one of the hardest to cooperate with.
Sure are.
Because we had some issues out our way with them. But have you picked up, or in your feeling, have you picked up a lot of business because of the supply chain issues out in the western ports? Or do we, I don't know how this works, but do we advertise and say, come to Baltimore or Maryland port and we can do a better job than Los Angeles and whoever?
Yes, sir. We advertise it daily. We are taking market share from the West Coast. We'll continue to take market share from the West Coast. We are the best port in the United States of America. We've had 40 ad hoc ships that have come to the Port of Baltimore since July of 2020. Ad hoc ships mean those that were otherwise not on a regular schedule and diverted from other ports that came into Baltimore. And we also have the advantage of the largest Ro-Ro port in the United States. So even in a container shortage, where containers are short worldwide and container ships are short worldwide, what I like to say is commerce and cargo will flow through the path of least resistance. And what they are doing now is they're transferring cargo that would ordinarily go in a container onto what's known as MAFI trailers. That's in your packet. And those it's a different source, but it can still hook up to an 18-wheeler. So we're getting an enormous amount of cargo that should be going on container ships coming into the Port of Baltimore on your Ro-Ro ships. We're well positioned.
I enjoyed the visit we had with the chairman and Delegate Stalling that day over there this summer, I think it was. See what's going on, and I think you're doing 5 new cranes.
We have 4 new cranes.
That'll be tremendous asset. So you know, I know you know, but I like to bring it up because a lot of times people don't think Mountain Maryland uses the port. Well, Mountain Maryland businesses do use the port. One of the biggest is coal. So where do you stand on exporting coal out of the port?
So what I can tell you is that on the coal, what we had is, let me see my numbers here, 20 million tons went out in 2021, 16.4 went out in 2020, 20.9 went out in 2019. So, look, I mean, coal is a major factor in the Port of Baltimore. We got 3 rail lines running from western Maryland, you know, also, you know, we got Ohio and West Virginia. So it all comes in on 3 rails. It's handled in the Port of Baltimore and exported.
Well, for those people who think coal's only used to produce electricity, not true. A lot of coal out of your port comes from Mountain Maryland, which has the best metallurgical coal in the world. A lot of it, most of it's being exported, and a lot of it's going through the Port of Baltimore.
Yes, sir.
And we hope that continues because it provides a lot of job opportunities for my part of the state. And the largest mine now is a deep mine, and if they keep their orders, which they hope they do and we hope they do, they could be mining at the level they're mining for probably the next 15, 20 plus years. So we need to keep the port viable for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question was answered, but I just want to congratulate you all. You know, the COVID-19 kind of set a lot of industries back, and I want to commend the efforts on in Maryland's ports to keep the business flowing, and it's always good to take whatever you can take away from competition. So keep it up. If there's anything we can do to help you continue to do that, we will. So great job. Great job.
Thank you. And just to close, I had one question in reference to page 16 of the analyst report. It talked about the delay in the Howard Street Tunnel. And just wanted to be able to understand how much of a delay in construction would we be experiencing. And obviously, because this is now pushing construction back, we know the cost of different materials is skyrocketing. Like, how does that impact in reference to the funding that we got from the Fed, CSX, and the state that put up with this? How would this impact that?
Do you want to speak?
Go ahead. Yeah, sure.
So what I can say is, if I say something wrong now, I will follow it up with an email to you.
Yes, sir.
We have not experienced any problems with CSX, and we talk to them weekly. I've got Brad Smith with me here, on the cost increases for materials. Okay, so that hasn't come to the surface. It hasn't even been discussed, so we're good in that. We had originally thought, under the ordinary timeline, that we were looking at fourth quarter of 2024 for completion. We're looking somewhere before second quarter 2025. Okay, so that's what we're looking at on the Howard Street Tunnel project. Packages are moving forward from CSX on, you know, there's 20 different packages, 10 in Maryland, 10 in Pennsylvania. Those are all moving forward, sir. So I think we're in pretty good shape.
Nope, that was my only question.
Okay.
Just want to first thank you all because you always pull us to the port. So I know that 3/4 of PST was down at the port this past year, and we look forward to getting Prince George's down at the port next year. Got it. But,
Okay.
You're always invited. You're always invited.
yeah, and just your due diligence. I know that met a couple times during the interim, and
Yes,
very
sir.
appreciative of that. You're just your open door policy and just the access that's there for the Maryland port. And as always, Secretary Ports. It's funny, Secretary Ports talking
Yeah, I
about the
know.
port.
I hear it all the time.
But just thank you both for your leadership, and thank you, Ms. Norton, in reference to the report. This ends the hearing for the Maryland Ports Administration, and that brings us to our last briefing for the day, Mdot, Maryland Aviation Administration, and this is also going to be our budget analyst is Ms. Kelly Norton. Ms. Norton.
In fiscal '23, the operating budget increases $8.2 million to $207.6 million for the Maryland Aviation Administration. The capital budget decreases $11.3 million to $89.2 million. Total passengers has continued to decrease at BWI Thurgood Marshall Airport. It was 12.5 million in calendar '21, down from 15.1 million in 2020. Total passengers is expected to grow in '22 and '23, but remain below pre-pandemic levels. BWI Marshall Airport competes with two other airports in the Baltimore-Washington region, the Washington Dulles International Airport and Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport. Although BWI Marshall's market share decreased from 45% to 37% in fiscal '21, it continues to have the most passengers of the three airports. Airports strive to keep cost per in-plane passenger, or CPE, low to be competitive in the marketplace. We do not have the fiscal '21 numbers for Dulles or Reagan airports, but we can see BWI Marshall was able to avoid the dramatic increase in CPE seen at the other regional airports in fiscal '21. BWI had an increase in CPE in fiscal '20. BWI had an increase in fiscal '21. It went from $12.55 to $16.43. The majority of agency spending went to BWI Marshall Airport with 96% of the operating budget. The bulk of the increase for the operating budget is due to an increased cost in janitorial services due to the shifting of these responsibilities out of the parking facilities concessions contract. Aviation Administration receives operating revenues that help offset its expenditures. Operating revenue is expected to fall in fiscal '23 to $264.6 million from $341.6 million in '22. This is due to the pandemic and will be discussed a little bit more later in the presentation. Here we have the pay-go allowance from the '22 through '27 CTP. It totals $896.4 million, which is a $42.1 million increase from the previous CTP. There's a decrease in spending for fiscal '25 through '27 due to half of the projects expected to be completed in fiscal '24. Exhibit 8 shows the pay-go allowance by fund. Most funding is from other, which consists of revenue bonds issued to cover the AB Connected project at BWI Marshall. Here's a list of the projects in the CTP. There is $222 million programmed in fiscal '23. The cost for these projects is $923.5 million, and the 6-year total is $896.3 million. Here we have the cash flow changes. There is a 24% decrease between the fiscal '22 legislative and working appropriations. The issue being discussed is the continued impact of COVID on BWI Marshall Airport. The airport continues to feel the impact of the pandemic on operations and revenues. This graph shows that while departing passenger traffic has increased in calendar '21, it is still below pre-pandemic levels. Here we see the operating revenue projections for BWI Marshall. The projections made in last year's legislative session and the ones for this session. Here we see that 2022 session's projection is outperforming the projections made in the 2021 session. This increase is due to an influx of federal relief funds in fiscal '21 and '22. However, this funding will be absent in fiscal '23's operating revenues projections, and revenues are expected to decrease $76 million. The agency should comment on the pandemic's continued impact on BWI Marshall's operations and finances. DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance with the operating budget and pay-go budget. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Norton. At this time, we'll bring up Secretary Reports and Executive Director Ricky Smith.
Okay, great. Well, again, good afternoon, Chairman McCray and members of the committee. For the record, my name is Jim Ports, Secretary of Maryland Department of Transportation. And again, it's a pleasure to be before you today to discuss Maryland Aviation Administration. I'm joined today by Ricky Smith, the Executive Director of MAA. And again, first, I'd like to thank DLS analyst Kelly Norton for her hard work. You know, we recognize this is the first year that you've reviewed Mdot's budget, and I just want to say you've done a great job. It's very complex, as you know, and, and you seem to have done very, very well. So thank you very much. BWI Marshall Airport remains the busiest airport in the National Capital Region, and passenger levels are currently about 70% of pre-COVID passenger volumes. We are confident that we will continue to see this recovery at BWI Marshall Airport. Our partners at Southwest Airlines continues to significantly expand their activity and offer more flights to more destinations. The team at MAA makes safety our first priority for all of our customers, including the air traveling public, airlines, and the entire airport community. With that, I'd like to thank Ricky and his entire MAA team for their continued focus on safety, and now I'd like to turn it over to Ricky to provide some additional information and address the DLS analysis.
Thank you, Jim. Secretary Ports,
Jim's fine.
Mr. Ports. And Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to present Mdot MAA's fiscal year 2023 budget. For the record, my name is Ricky Smith, Executive Director of the Maryland Aviation Administration. You have a PowerPoint deck in front of you that will provide you a lot of insight on our performance. I will not go through that PowerPoint deck in your interest, but if you have any questions related to it, let me know. I, too, want to join the chorus of those who are commending Kelly Norton for her work. She's been an amazing analyst, and we enjoy working with her. She can be tough if she needs to be, but she's been very, very professional with that. So thank you very much, Kelly, for your analysis, and look forward to continuing working with you. So needless to say, 2021 was a challenging year for BWI Marshall Airport. However, we're on the road of recovery. Our passenger traffic is recovering quite nicely. In 2021, BWI Marshall handled nearly 19 million passengers, and today, as the Secretary mentioned, we have been trending at about 70% of pre-COVID passenger levels in 2019, when we served 27 million, our fifth straight year of record-setting levels prior to that. Martin State Airport, too, which is an important airport for us as well, has recovered quite well as the general aviation and corporate aviation sector return to the skies. Air cargo continues to be the silver lining and continues to grow, primarily driven by Amazon's two midfield cargo facilities comprised of a 260,000 square foot and a multiple aircraft parking positions. FedEx, UPS, DHL also continue to handle record levels of air cargo to support our increasing e-commerce. Chair, I have many more points here I could make, but in the interest of time and to your delight, I will cut this short.
It's very much appreciated.
I will end by saying the Maryland Aviation Administration is working very hard to climb out of this pandemic, and we're looking very optimistically ahead.
Yes, sir.
Again, the analysts recommended one issue that we comment on. We have responded to that comment, to that issue in writing. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. Thank you.
Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Secretary and Mr. Executive Director. A couple points. One question. If you could speak to the impact of COVID on your workforce, that's one. Two, I'd like to comment on your rebounding. My wife and I, we travel a lot, business and sometimes pleasure, but BWI has been the home for us to go in and out. You guys are very, staff is number one over there. And thirdly, if you could also comment on, you said right now we're at 70%?
Yes.
And your projections going forth as we're trying to climb out of this.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
So with respect to the workforce, I mean, first of all, thank you for that question, because I welcome the opportunity to commend the workforce at the airport. I think we demonstrated ourselves as the most resilient, most courageous workforce you can find at the airport, particularly our janitorial service workers, which are employees of Chime and Alliance. These are employees that have special needs. But despite when others were trying to get out of the way of the pandemic, they came to the airport every day and they delivered a facility that the industry said is the most clean, safe, and secure facility in the country in North America. And so, and that's just an example of the entire workforce. And so Are they a little tired? Yes, they're a little tired, but I think there's some optimism around the pandemic, and they're still coming in every day and serving the passengers and doing it quite well.
Yeah, we actually travel to a number of different places, and BWI, again, going out or coming back in is refreshing. Destinations may be fine, but your facility is impeccable, so.
Thank you, Senator. With respect to the recovery, so at one point, we were forecasting, because we don't have a crystal ball now, but we were forecasting that it would be around 2024 before we begin to see any increase. We're still being conservative, and we're projecting that it'll be sometime around 2027 when we see pre-pandemic levels. However, if you look at the trajectory of our travel so far, we are moving faster. We're recovering more quickly than our forecasters, and we feel very good about that. As long as we don't have another variant, and recovery continues, we feel very good about our traffic coming back pretty quickly. Our concessionaires have responded very well. We're now about 98% open of all of our food and retail outlets, and we feel good about that. And I talked earlier about the cargo program. That's continued to be really a game saver for us, because they continue to provide very strong operations while the others were shutting down to some degree.
Great job, and I don't want to, I'd be remiss, Mr. Chairman, if I didn't mention those shuttle bus drivers and those folks there as well.
Absolutely.
So, we're at least almost back to monthly travel, and so we kind of use you a lot, so thank you for your service. So,
I appreciate your service, sir.
absolutely, thank you.
Yes, sir. Senator Edwards.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Ports, you do a good job with the water ports, and you also take care of the airports.
That's right.
So, Executive Director Smith, I can't answer it now, but if you can send me the answers.
Okay.
I represent 3 counties, all have airports. You give money to other airports. Could you, I know Cumberland's expanding their runway.
Yes.
Garrett finished theirs not too long ago, and building, I think, some, what do you call them, to store the planes in?
Hangars.
Hangars,
Yes,
thank you.
hangars.
So could you send me, on each one, in Hagerstown Airport, how much and what they did like the last 5 years and what they're projected to do over the next 5 to 10 years for those 3 airports? I would appreciate it.
Absolutely, sir. We'll get that to you as soon as possible. I'll say we've been working very closely with Cumberland, that has embarked on a multi-year plan. They're
Yeah.
doing a very engaged expansion program there, and we're working very closely with them. We work very closely with all of them, so I'll provide you a summary of that.
And if I might, Mr. Chairman, most of you don't know the Cumberland Airport's actually in West Virginia. Do they put any money into that expansion project there, the state of West Virginia?
It's, I'm not aware of the state of West Virginia. I did know that there's some federal funds in there, the airport funds, and then the state of Maryland through the Secretary's office is also investing in that airport
Okay.
through our
Okay.
Regional Aviation Assistance Program.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator
you,
Edwards,
sir.
I just want to mention real quick, I know you're a big sports fan, so am I. And I know, I think Michael Jordan's one of the greatest players ever played the game. And so much so that Nike gave him his own shoe line, the Air Jordan. He's got nothing on me because I have airports.
Airports, water ports. Yep, first just want to say, Secretary Porch, you heard this several times now. Just thank you for your leadership, and Executive Director Smith, just thank you for your leadership, your guidance, but most importantly, one of the things that really stood out to me was the transparency around the RFP with this concession piece of it. So just thank you for making sure that the General Assembly was engaged in that, where we won't have questions because we were there with you and able to understand that. Ms. Norton, just thank you for what you do in reference to the detailed piece of it. I think it was said several times. And colleagues, this was the last briefing, so that ends the hearings for PST for Friday. Have a blessed weekend.